Hello and welcome to SAS from Scratch. My name is Jan. This is my first YouTube series in which I plan to cover the SAS system and help you hopefully achieve a SAS Base certification at the end of the day. So I plan to start today by talking about the PDV, but it occurred to me as I was setting up the slides that I should actually be starting with introductions. Now, for subsequent sessions, we will be doing a lot more programming, actual programming, and we'll be looking at the language. These two sessions, episode 0 and episode 1, are going to focus on slides. Please don't skip these slides because they are very important. If you do want to skip episode 0, please just skip to episode 1 because the PDV or program data vector is fundamentally important to SAS. So that's something that you absolutely cannot skip. For your own benefit and for things to make sense down the line, please make sure you watch the slides where I go through the program data vector. Okay, so let's ask ourselves, what is SAS? It's a computer programming language that is used for statistical analyses. It was developed by the SAS Institute in the 1970s. It's been around since then, since when computers were as big as a house. It used to run on punch cards, mainframes, all of that old stuff. If you know about it, that's how long it's been around. If I were asked to describe the language, I would call it a business language more than a scientific language. The main reason for this being that you kind of tell SAS what you want to happen and SAS will make it happen. So it's not quite, for example, if you wanted to sort something, you would simply tell SAS, please sort this data set for me. And you would not have to worry about whether you're going to implement a quick sort or a merge sort or any of those specifics. And that's kind of the one thing I think that SAS is aiming for and has been aiming for since the 1970s, is to make results happen and not having to stress too much about exactly what is going on in the background. So why bother to learn SAS? SAS has a lot of competition, I think, for statistical analyses. There's other applications like R that are free and open source, but SAS is still one of the primary statistical tools in both the financial and healthcare sectors. I think both of these are very important sectors to the industry, to their respective industries. If you've got banks, credit card companies, if you've got pharmaceutical companies, clinical research organizations, all of those types of companies, you're bound to find a SAS license and a SAS system and SAS programmers in there. It's been around for a long time, as we've said, so it's a very trusted and mature system. And especially in cases like the pharmaceutical sector, where you've got regulatory authorities like the FDA, etc., you want to work with something that's trusted and mature. You can use R, for example. The validation of R and the packages that you use is a bit more involved. So it is possible. I don't want to misrepresent that fact. But in general, I think that from the perspective of both R and SAS programmers, both sides will agree that SAS is the more mature system. It's more easily trusted and accepted by if you'd like to distill it to this, the bureaucrats, the regulatory authorities, the auditors, etc. And then the third point is debatable, but generally speaking, and in my experience, SAS programmers are usually in high demand, especially in these two sectors that I just mentioned, and the pay is fairly good if you compare it to other programming languages and the demand for it. There is competition, as I've said, languages like R, languages like Python. SAS is, in my opinion, still king of the hill. It handles big data, for example, very well. I think it's going to be around for a good couple more years, perhaps even decades to come. But we are seeing a tremendous uptake of R and Python in the healthcare sector as well. But SAS won't disappear overnight. I think there's still a lot of room for it to grow. Competition might actually be good. SAS licenses are prohibitively expensive, so the fact that we've got these open source alternatives and the fact that people are embracing them might actually open up the SAS system to more people. Might bring some of the licensing costs down, might spur some more innovation. Competition is always good. If you've never seen the SAS system before, you're probably curious as to what the interface looks like. So if you go all the way back in history to way back in the day, we talked about the mainframes. And SAS would run on punch cards back then. So that's way before my time. Hopefully, well, I was going to say hopefully before most of you viewings time as well, but it's very possible that there's still people around that can remember punch cards and perhaps even actually using punch cards. You don't have to implement a SAS interface. You can run SAS from the command line. This is usually called batch mode. And so what that involves is simply passing the .sas file, which is just a plain text file, to the underlying SAS system. So we're going to look at 3 development environments or IDEs in the next few slides. But they are simply an interface layer that's being placed on top of the SAS system. Excuse me. So there's nothing preventing you from using your favorite text editor, whether that's Vim or Emacs or VS Code, whatever you want, saving that .sas file and then passing that file along to the interpreter. In most cases that I have seen, you would usually see one of 3 SAS Institute editors being used as the interface. And the first of these are the SAS windowing environment. So this is the first one that I started on myself when I first started programming SAS in 2010. And it looks old. It's a very effective interface for getting work done, make no mistake. But if you're not used to these older types of interfaces with the modular, bits and pieces forms that are floating around, you might not enjoy viewing this very much. I personally don't mind it. I think it's a good and efficient interface. I also want to mention that these images are not my own. So these were taken from the SAS blogs. You can see the link down in the bottom. And they were actually captured by Susan Slaughter, who's one of the authors of the Little SAS book. Little SAS book also being a very respected sort of teaching method for learning SAS. Has been through multiple editions, has been around for many years. Some people swear by it. It works for some people, it doesn't work for others. But if it is a resource that you're open to, the little SAS book is a good starter as well. So that's a SAS windowing environment. You may or may not have seen this before. Maybe your university has a license for it, or the company you work for. The second one is the SAS Enterprise Guide. This was also the second interface that I personally worked with. This was not one of my favorites. It gets the job done. There's nothing, I guess, fundamentally wrong with it. But between the three interfaces that we'll look at, this one was probably not up there for me personally. The one nice feature that it had was the ability to use projects. And within these project files, you could bundle a bunch of, programs and outputs and things. You might work in a company or be attending a university that uses Enterprise Guide. And then lastly, and this is the most modern interface, is SAS Studio. This is also the latest interface that I've personally been using. This is also the interface that we'll use for this crash course, because this is what SAS On Demand for Academics presents to you as a user. As far as I know, your only option is SAS Studio, and this runs in a web browser. So the nice thing about this, and especially if you're working in a large company, or you're accessing it from an academic institution or whatever it might be, is the fact that even though the SAS server can sit somewhere far away, your SAS interface runs within your browser. So you've not got input lag that you would normally have from a remote desktop or a Citrix connection or whatever it might be. This is quite fun, and you can upload and download files directly from the web browser as well. And that's something that we can look at in one of the subsequent sessions as well, as getting data to and from SAS Studio. This is a fun interface. It's the most modern one. As far as I'm aware, this is the one that the SAS Institute is trying to push as well. And if you've not got access to a different SAS installation at work or at your educational institution, this is the one you'll be using if you use SAS On Demand for Academics. What will we learn in this course? My goal for this course is essentially to take all of the topics that are in the book. So there's a book called the SAS Base Certification Prep Guide, which essentially prepares you for the SAS Base exam. My idea is to take the chapters in that prep guide and do a one-to-one mapping from them into this video series, with the goal that once you're done with the series and once you're done with the book, you'll be able to go and write and hopefully pass the SAS Base exam. Now, obviously, I don't guarantee this, because this is a free course. It's a free show. There's zero guarantees. You're not paying for anything. The one thing that we're not covering, there's a few things that we're not covering. A big one is plotting, graphs, figures, etc. And the other one is some of your SAS advanced topics like arrays or SQL or macros. I might decide to do a video series later on that covers SAS advanced, but this one is specifically for SAS Base. Okay, what will you need to follow along with this course? You're going to need some foundational knowledge about computers and programming languages. You don't have to know about a data science language specifically. It will certainly help. But if you've never done SAS or you've never done R, you should at least know a little bit about Visual Basic, C#, anything. The main reason for this is that we're going to get to certain points where we'll look at, for example, the length statement in SAS, and we'll say, okay, well, the length of this particular character variable is 8. And by that, we mean that the SAS interpreter will go and reserve 8 bytes to store a certain piece of text. And so if we're talking about things like reserving bytes and general computing terms, it's good that you won't be completely lost when we talk about them. So for me, a fundamental prerequisite would be that you need to have done at least one other programming language, and you need to have a foundational knowledge about computers and computer systems. You will need access to a SAS interpreter if you want to follow along with the code, if you want to try it out for yourself. SAS on demand for academics, just Google it. That's a sort of a service that's made available by the SAS Institute. So as long as you're not using your SAS on demand account to do actual work, or you're abusing it, and to my knowledge they do monitor these things, you can use SAS free of charge, and it will be more than adequate for this SAS base course that we're running through. You really should get a copy of the book, the SAS Certification Prep Guide for Base Programming for SAS 9. The edition doesn't really matter. I think they might be up to the 5th or the 6th edition by now. You can probably go as far back as one of the first, second, or third editions even. It's mostly the same throughout. And then please do not ask for illegal copies of SAS or any of the books, either from me. I will not respond to your query, and neither in the comments section. Please respect the copyright of these documents and the software. We're not facilitating piracy in this course. So first of all, a little bit about myself before we get started with the actual thing that I wanted to cover today, the actual topic. So I've been programming in the pharmaceutical industry for my entire career, my entire professional career. I've got about 13 years of SAS programming experience. I still make plenty of mistakes day to day. There's a lot of stuff I don't get right. There's a lot of stupid mistakes that I still, common pitfalls that I fall into. But I have been around for a while. I've passed my SAS Base, SAS Advanced, and SAS Clinical Trial certifications. Hopefully, this course will allow you to get your first badge, which is the SAS Base one. And then just another side note about myself is that I am recording this from my home. I'm recording this on my personal computer. Obviously, at work I have a SAS license. I don't want to do this on my work machine. I prefer to keep these two, work and personal life, separate. Hence why I'm using the SAS on demand for academic service as well. Now, since I'm doing this from my house, you're going to occasionally hear my dog barking. You're going to hear noises from around the house if my wife is busy with something. As I've said in one of the previous slides, it's a free show. If you don't like it, you can honestly just find another one. But I do hope you'll stick around. Okay, let's get to the actual topic that I wanted to talk about today. And that is the PDV. This is one of the most fundamentally important topics that we will cover. You have to understand the PDV. It is not optional. If you want to have any success with SAS and have success in understanding how SAS works, the PDV is non-optional. I have encountered throughout my career a number of programmers who have been programming in SAS for a while, and I think a lot of this holds true for a lot of the beginners, and it holds true for myself as well. You can get around using SAS without fully understanding how the PDV works. However, to be an effective SAS programmer, you have to know how it works. You have to know how to manipulate the PDV. And if you want to pass the SAS base exam, you do need to know how the PDV works as well. So let me move on to the next slide, and then we'll proceed from there. The PDV stands for the program data vector. And officially, the definition that you'll find in the base prep guide is that it is a logical area in memory where SAS builds the dataset one observation at a time. Now, what that means, and I have an example that we'll go through, but what that means is that SAS is building a dataset one row at a time. And that is a very, very important concept to understand, especially if you're coming from R, for example. If you do come from R and you do have that sort of background, take for example the way you would calculate the mean in R. If you pass a column to the mean function in R, R will take all of the values in that column, go through them, it treats it as a vector, and it returns the mean value back to you. Now the way SAS works is if you're only dealing with one row, then passing a column to the mean function, a single column, is only going to return that value back to you. So the mean function within what is called a data step in SAS is only for one row at a time. We will, throughout the course of this series, start looking at procs as well. So a SAS program consists of data steps and procs. 98% of your SAS program will be the data steps or procs. And so if you want to get the mean from a column, that's something that's done with a proc. That could be a proc means or a proc SQL or whatever it might be. But for now, keep in mind that in R, the mean function in a data step is to be used within one row across several columns, and that is very different from what R is doing. When we say SAS is different, I mean it. If you come from R, if you come from another language like C#, Java, basically anything, the only one that I am not personally experienced with that's similar is something like SPSS. I haven't seen it or looked at that one before, but almost every other language, and I've had experience with many languages throughout my life, SAS is completely different from all of them. It's going to take you some time to get used to it. You will probably have to rewatch some of these videos. You will have to do some exercises by yourself. But I cannot overstate how important an understanding of the PDV is to learn and understand SAS. There's going to be several times where you might type something into the SAS interpreter. It'll spit something back to you, and you're going to say, this is not quite what I asked. Why is this happening? It's not an error, it's not a warning. It's just, I passed this piece of code and I expected to get something different back. The answer is almost always going to be the PDV. And so let's look at an example of the PDV. Let's say we have the following input data set. Now there's a piece of code there in the bottom of your screen. Don't worry about it too much. I'll step through it. And this is one of the simplest examples excuse me, that you can find. So we've got a data set with 3 rows and 3 columns. Sorry, let me just grab a bit of water. I'm not too used to monologuing. So we've got a data set with 3 rows and 3 columns. We've got a column with names, so we've got Abe, we've got Bob, we've got Charlie. Each of those has a car that starts with the same letter as their name, because that's just easier to keep track of. And then each of them earns a monthly salary. So we don't know the currency. Maybe it's dollars, in which case that's criminal. Maybe it's Bitcoin, in which case that might also be criminal. But these guys have a car and a salary associated with themselves. And so stepping through the bit of code at the bottom, this first line that says data out underscore ds, so that's the out data set. That is just the name that we gave to this data set. We could have called this anything. We could have called it my data set or names and cars or whatever we wanted. And in the next video we'll go over rules for naming these data sets and variables and so on. But for the moment, just know that this first line is outputting a data set that is called outDS. In the second line, we're reading in input from something called inDS. That is again an arbitrary name. So in our imaginary example, this data set that we're looking at here is called in underscore ds. And then we are passing a single instruction to SAS. And that is to say, if we know that this is the monthly salary, let's multiply it by 12 to get the annual salary for the year. And we close our data step out with a run statement. So really this is the bit of code you need to worry about, where we do the multiplication. The rest of this is basically where's the data coming from, where's it going to. So from in ds, no, let me start with this. So this is our input. We have not run this program yet. Our program data vector is empty and our output is also empty. Now, if we run this program and SAS starts initializing the program data vector, and this is a simplified example. So if memory serves, what's actually happening is SAS is initializing in the program data vector all of the column names, and then it reads in the data from the first record. So here I've simplified it to simply show the data directly. And so SAS starts by reading this first record, and then within this data step that you've given it, it's going to go through the statements you've made, and it's going to be building this within the PDV. So it's not going to touch your input data set. It'll step through it, fetch a record one by one, do stuff within this logical area of memory, and then once it's done with all of your statements, it'll take that record that's in the PDV, place it in output, and start with the next record over again. And so that's what's happening here. We're at the top of this data step. We're reading in the first record, and once we've got that in, SAS is going to go to the second statement, which is to calculate the annual salary. So SAS will take, in Abe's case, 100 somethings a month, which translate to 1200 of that per year. And then because that is the last instruction that we've given to SAS within this data step, it's going to take what we've got in the PDV and it's going to put that into the output data set. And that's what we've got there. So we've taken the first record, we've added a column, and we've now successfully written that out somewhere. And this will continue to be done, and this loop will continue until we're done with the entire data set, until SAS reaches Charlie, and then after Charlie encounters an end of file marker, then only will SAS exit this data step completely and move on to either a next data step or a proc step, whatever it might be. So we are done with Abe. You can see Abe is in the output. SAS starts from the top again. It reads the next record, which in this case is Bob. So Bob is now in the PDV, as you can see here. Bob's car, the BMW, is in there, and Bob's monthly salary is in there. Now that we've read in the record, SAS executes the next statement in this data step, which is to calculate the annual salary. And you can see that the salary has been added to Bob's row in the PDV. Again, I want to stress we're not changing anything here. This happens in the PDV. The PDV finishes its job and then moves the row in the PDV to the output data set, which is what's happening there. Now we're again at the bottom of the data step. We've executed all the instructions, but we're not done with the input. So we need to go back to the top of the instructions, read the next record, and continue, which is what's happening here. Charlie and Charlie's information, the car and the salary, are now in the PDV. We've read it in. We can go to the next step, which is calculating the annual salary. In Charlie's case, that's 200 by 12, which is 2400. And after we've finished executing this statement, we can write out Charlie's record from the PDV into the output data set. And this is fundamentally how the PDV system works. So again, I think for a newcomer, if you only look at input and you only look at output, you may be tempted to think that SAS has done something similar to R, which is to treat that monthly salary column as a vector and output a vector, but that is not what's happening. It is always a row-based operation. If anything about the PDV is unclear, please rewatch this section because it is so fundamentally important. Again, as I've said, if you ever find yourself asking why is SAS doing this to my data, the answer is probably the PDV. If you've got 10 records in a data set and you loop from 1 to 10, that's a good homework question, but I'll give you the answer as well. SAS will loop 10 times within the PDV. So that's, let's say you have a do loop within your data step. SAS is going to take each record, put that record into the PDV. While that record is in the PDV, loop 10 times and do whatever you want it to do, and then move that to the output. Move on to the next record, put it in the PDV, loop 10 times, etc. So that's another one of the fundamental differences to get used to. We're going to be talking about the PDV over and over and over again in future videos. You will get sick and tired of hearing about it, but it is so fundamentally important that we can't not do it. And that's it for episodes 0 and 1. So future episodes will have a lot more actual programming code and not just slides. I think slides were definitely the way to go for these first two topics. But in the next one, we'll spin up SAS Studio and we'll actually execute some code as well. In the next episode, we'll talk about different kinds of statements, whether they're global, whether they have limited scope. Excuse me. We'll talk about libraries, what they are and how they work, and we'll look at datasets. We'll look at rules for naming your variables, naming your datasets, what you can and can't do. And that'll correspond directly as well to what's in chapter 2 of the SAS Base prep guide. With that, I'm going to close out this session's recording. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave a like and a comment. Let me know if there's anything I can improve. And I hope to see you for episode 2. Cheers.